Hi everybody, I'm Alister Benn and you're watching Expressive Photography. One of the things about photography that I absolutely love is that sense of surprise and then the process of problem solving. Now, composition and photography might not naturally sort of appear to be problem solving, but I think that is one of the things that for me keeps me at it, keeps me excited, and makes me want to take the camera out the bag. In this video, I want to just approach one image or one set of images that I made on the recent trip to Iceland. Quite often on that road trip, we were just driving through the landscape and I would see something or someone else would see something that just caught our eye. We would dive out and make some photographs quite quickly, quite spontaneously, and then we would get back in the truck and drive off to our next location. The thing with that is that there's a certain speed to it. A lot of the time we did have time to immerse ourselves in the landscape for longer, spending time with a scene, taking our time, but sometimes when you've got a few hundred kilometers to drive, you just need to get on with it and get the miles under your belt. The scene that I want to address here is this one, and this is the full frame of my GFX 100S. I do have my case circular polarizer on, which was staying on the camera most of the time. And the thing that made me stop as I was driving along wasn't the dramatic light or the wonderful colours. It was the isolation of this rock kind of just sitting on top of the landscape there. This is obviously a heavily glaciated area, where glaciers have been piling over the landscape for a long time. And this to me looks like an erratic glacial boulder, something that's just been dropped onto the landscape and left as the ice has retreated. So this was the first shot that I took. And if I go into the as shot mode, you will see, not surprisingly, that I made a 65 by 24 horizontal version of this scene. As soon as we crop into the scene, to the shot that I took, it becomes very obvious why I cropped it where I did. Because if we go back to the full frame, this boulder in the foreground, it either had to be in the frame completely or out of the frame completely. If I go back to the full frame image, I was shooting this at f11, 400th of a second ISO 640, so it was kind of gloomy weather. But what's happened is this boulder is super tack sharp because that's what has to be sharp. So this is part of the craft, this is part of the game, is what needs to be sharp and what can we get away with being less sharp. So in the foreground here, we can see there's quite a lot of out of focus material. And as we move through the frame, it gets super sharp. And then the background is somewhat diffused again. So stuff in the background being diffused, I don't have a massive problem with. Gloomy weather, loads of atmosphere, very high humidity, not great visibility. Having something in the foreground that has to be sharp, has to be sharp. And allowing everything else to just fall into place is perfectly okay. So if I go back to my as shot here, what is very clear to me is that I love the isolation of this boulder. I love this one, how it's sort of superimposed against the other peak here. And the only little question mark for me is the consequence, and there's this great word again that I tend to use quite a lot when talking about composition, is there's a consequence of this union, this join. And what that made me do was I looked on the back of the camera and instantly thought, And I went on to make the second version of this scene, which is basically taking a tiny little step to the left. And I'm talking, maybe literally a step. And what that does is it changes the confluence of this and this. And it's quite clear between these two images. This one feels a little bit more spacious. This one feels a little bit more compact. I believe I have zoomed out a fraction as well. So I'm at 140 mil here and I was at 165 mil here. So these little micro adjustments, regardless of how conscious you are of them as you make them, are super important, because at the end of the day, this is what composition is. Anyone who says that landscape photography isn't art or isn't a fine art because the landscape is just there and all you have to do is point your camera at it is missing the point that compositions only exist from one point in space. Relationships between midground, foregrounds and backgrounds only really exist from a point in space. And it's very obvious to me here that this version and this version feel completely different. Therefore, the landscape isn't just waiting for you to point your camera at it. You have to find these relationships. I wasn't sure yet, and I made this final version. So these are the 3 shots that I took. And just used the 3 boulders in isolation against a much plainer background. And in many ways, I don't have a strong preference for which of these 3 images, but I'm very aware that each of them is different. And that difference is something that I just want to accept and just say, okay, well, that one works because of that, and this one works because of that, but one isn't better than the other. And I think that's a really healthy attitude to have, is that at any given time, I'm going to have a preference for either of them. This one is a very, I like the zebra stripes of the mountain on the left there. In this one, I do quite like that confluence. It feels very organized to me. So at the end of the day, none of these scenes are actually any better than the other. What I could do if I wanted to, and given the fact that I've got a few megapixels to spare, is I could change the relationship with that left edge. I could get a bit more space on the bottom even. I like this rising culmination of the scene. So that's cropped in a little bit better, and because I'm cropping in, you increase the intimacy of the scene. So you're bringing things closer. So it's like zooming in. As I've mentioned before in these YouTube videos, the GFX 100S, the longest lens I have is 200mm, which I think is about 149mm or 150 odd mil in 35mm equivalent. So I am limited with zooming in. However, this version of this scene I really, really like. Ways to enhance the presence of it is I can add a little bit of punch using the camera calibration tool. The blueness I quite like, so I don't have a major problem with that. If I increase the luminosity, then we are instantly going to make it feel more energetic. And this is where the playfulness and the craft is a continuum. So in the field, every millimeter counts in terms of where I'm stood to compose the scene. And the aspect ratio I choose in the field, obviously, we've gone from a full frame scene to a much, much more zoomed in scene, a much more panoramic scene. And the impact of those choices takes photography to a new level. And this is why it's so important for us to be ourselves and to feel free and liberated when we're out in the landscape. I can only be me. I don't want to be trying to emulate another photographer or the style that they shoot. I can only be me, because that is where I am unique. That is where I can go into the landscape and be myself. So every decision we make, if we make it for the right reasons and we make it with a degree of confidence, then we always know that we're being the best version of ourselves photographically. So as I'm talking, I'm actually falling in love with this scene, because it is a product of where I stood with my feet on the ground in this beautiful area of Iceland, The weather was foul. We'd been hit by gales and pouring rain, so it wasn't all shorts and sandals. But this little unique arrangement of these erratic glacial boulders juxtaposed in this very heavily glaciated landscape, it speaks to me. And I'm really actually loving this foreground. It just, all of these little rocks and boulders, just all the intricacy, all the little holes that you can see, the fact that there's space underneath the boulder there. And processing this image is one of those things that I can add little touches of punch just to give it a little bit more. There's any number of ways we could process this. It could be black and white. It could be much more high contrast. But at the moment, I seem to be fascinated by nature, just the way it presents itself to me. So I'm doing very little processing, to the point where if we see the before and after, obviously the one on the right has a little bit more punch to it, but it's not terribly far removed from the real scene. So in this video, what I really wanted to highlight was that photography is this wonderful game. It's playing cat and mouse. It's the landscape hiding from you, and you have to find it, count to 100 and go and find it. There are literally compositions everywhere in the landscape, from the macro to the gigantic, majestic scenes. There are subtle interactions and relationships that are just there waiting to be found. And if we go into the landscape with an open mind and a good attitude, then we can certainly find interesting things to point our cameras at. I really like this scene. Now, the fact that I've gone back and processed the first version that I took always amuses me, because it basically means my initial gut composition was my favorite. And even though I admire other aspects of the ones that came after it, the one that I took first was just, that is the place for me to stand. And that's where experience comes in, and your intuition, and just going with the flow and allowing for these serendipitous moments of, if I see a relationship with the landscape, then all I need to do is point my camera at it. If I need to work at it and overthink it, then maybe the relationship isn't that strong in the first place. I tend to recognize the strongest compositional arrangements and relationships first, and then I might work around it a little bit. But generally, I'm very much a shoot from the hip type of person. I hope you found this useful. Fieldcraft is an exciting part of landscape photography. I love being able to go into the landscape and feel excited by what I can find, surprised at what I can find. Surprise, I think, is the biggest gift you can ever get as an artist, is to find something that just excites you and surprises you. But we can see that as soon as we come back into the digital darkroom, we have the opportunity to explore these scenes with a fresh pair of eyes. The pair of eyes that's not cold, the pair of eyes that's got a full tummy, the pair of eyes that hasn't been suffering for days on end, bouncing around on dirt roads. Being able to revisit these scenes, revisit these compositions, and fine-tune them is a really exciting part of the photographic craft. If you enjoy this content, please do subscribe. We really appreciate that, and it helps us to get our content out to you. Check also the Expressive Photography Forum, which of course is a private subscription community for people who are really looking to explore their creativity through very different methods from the mainstream. An incredible group of photographers who are so open and accepting for individual points of view, and truly understand the meaning and value of critique. And finally, check out the case filters in the link below. I've been using case filters for quite a few years now, and I'm a global ambassador for them. I use them every time I'm out with a camera because of their quality and durability. So thank you very much, as always, for watching this video, and I look forward to sharing some more thoughts with you next week. Bye for now.